Jerry adjusted his uniform, straightened his tie, and took his usual position by the plane's entrance. He had done this countless times before, greeting passengers with warmth, offering them a smile, and wishing them a safe flight. But today, something felt different. Maybe it was the weather. The sky was darker than usual, with thick clouds hanging overhead. Or maybe it was the feeling deep inside him, the quiet voice that whispered that something was about to change. "Welcome aboard," he said with a warm smile as the first passengers approached. "I wish you a safe and enjoyable flight. Your journey is in safe hands, in the name of my Lord." Most people smiled back, nodding as they stepped onto the plane. Some responded with kind words, others simply with a polite nod. But then she arrived. Mrs. Clara. She was in her late 50s, dressed in an expensive designer coat, with diamond earrings that sparkled even in the dim light of the boarding tunnel. Her expression was sharp, her eyes filled with judgment. As she heard Jerry's greeting, her face twisted with disgust. She stopped in front of him, folding her arms. "Did you just bring God into this?" Jerry met her gaze, still smiling but feeling the tension in the air. "Yes, ma'am. I believe in His protection for all of us." Mrs. Clara scoffed loudly, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. "How ignorant," she spat. "You really think some invisible sky fairy is going to keep this plane in the air? Science keeps this plane in the air, boy, not your God." A hush fell over the boarding line. A few passengers looked uncomfortable, while others exchanged glances, unsure of how to react. But Jerry? He stayed calm. "I respect your beliefs, ma'am," he said softly. "I hope you can respect mine." Her eyes flickered down to the silver cross hanging from his neck. Her expression darkened. "That nonsense around your neck won't save you," she said coldly. Jerry didn't flinch. "Maybe not, ma'am. But my faith has carried me through worse." She let out a humorless laugh and pushed past him onto the plane, muttering under her breath. The other passengers hurried along, some offering Jerry an apologetic glance, others avoiding eye contact altogether. As the last of the travelers boarded, Jerry let out a slow breath, shaking off the encounter. He had faced worse before. This was nothing new. But deep down, he had a strange feeling, one he couldn't explain. And he was right. The flight took off smoothly, climbing above the thick clouds. Jerry moved through the cabin, ensuring passengers were comfortable. He noticed Mrs. Clara sitting stiffly in her seat, her arms crossed, looking out the window with an impatient scowl. For a while, everything seemed fine. But then, the first jolt hit. It was small at first, just a slight tremor. Some passengers barely noticed. But then, another came. Stronger. The plane shook violently, causing a few gasps to spread through the cabin. Jerry grabbed onto the nearest seat for balance as the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts." The plane rocked again, this time more aggressively. Overhead bins rattled. A few gasps turned into full-fledged cries of panic. Then, the worst happened. A deafening explosion sounded from the right engine. The plane dipped sharply. Passengers screamed as oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling. The cabin lights flickered wildly. Jerry's stomach twisted as he fought to stay on his feet. He rushed toward the nearest passengers, helping them secure their masks. Chaos erupted around him, people crying, praying, clinging to their loved ones. And then he saw her. Mrs. Clara. The woman who had mocked him, who had laughed at his faith, was now gripping her seat in sheer terror. Her eyes were wide, her face pale. "Jerry!" she screamed. Oh God, I don't want to die." For the first time, she called out to a God she claimed she didn't believe in. And for the first time, she looked at Jerry not with hatred, but with desperation. Jerry didn't hesitate. He rushed to her side, gripping her trembling hands. "I'm here," he said firmly. "Breathe. You're not alone." Tears streamed down her face. Please pray for me." Jerry squeezed her hands tightly and closed his eyes. Amidst the screaming, the chaos, the fear, he prayed. He prayed not just for Mrs. Clara, but for everyone on board. For the pilots fighting to regain control. For the scared children clutching their parents. For the strangers holding hands in unity. Then, as if the heavens had heard, the turbulence started to ease. The violent shaking lessened. The wild descent slowed. The captain's voice returned, calmer this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have stabilized. We are out of immediate danger." A collective cry of relief swept through the plane. People hugged, sobbed, whispered prayers of gratitude. And Mrs. Clara? She was still gripping Jerry's hands, her entire body shaking. She looked at him, eyes filled with something new. Not anger, not hatred, but something much deeper. When the plane finally landed safely, Mrs. Clara didn't rush off like the others. She sat quietly in her seat, staring at her trembling hands. Jerry approached her gently. "You okay, ma'am?" She looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "I was wrong," she whispered. "About you. About everything." Jerry smiled softly. "It's never too late to believe." A single tear rolled down her cheek. Would you tell me more? About your faith?" Jerry nodded. "I'd be honored." And just like that, the woman who once mocked him was now willing to listen. But neither of them knew that this was only the beginning. Because sometimes, the greatest journeys don't happen in the air. They happen in the heart. The plane had landed, but Mrs. Clara sat frozen in her seat. The world around her moved, passengers gathering their belongings, murmuring about the near-death experience, and flight attendants assisting shaken travelers. But she was stuck in her thoughts. She had faced many things in her life, but never had she been so close to death. And never had she felt so lost. Jerry waited by her side patiently. His presence was steady, reassuring, yet something about him stirred a deep, buried memory within her. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "I don't understand, Jerry. How can you stay so calm? How do you believe in a God that let you suffer?" Jerry sat across from her. His dark eyes held wisdom beyond his years. "Because, Mrs. Clara, I've seen him work in ways I can't explain." She swallowed. "Like what?" Jerry's face darkened slightly, as if he was debating whether to tell her. Then, with a slow breath, he began. "My parents were missionaries," he said. "They died when I was 10. A car crash. After that, I was placed in a foster home where I was," he hesitated, his jaw tightening, "treated badly." Mrs. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had expected something tragic, but not that. "I ran away when I was 15. Lived on the streets. Slept in alleys, begged for food. But I kept my faith." Jerry gave a small, sad smile. "And one day, someone saw me. An old pilot named Mr. Dawson. He gave me a job at the airport cleaning floors. Said I had a spark in me. He told me I could be more." Clara listened, her chest tightening. The way he spoke, the kindness he carried, it was so familiar. Then, she gasped. "Dawson," she whispered. Jerry blinked. "Yes. You knew him." A cold shiver ran down her spine. She had. Years ago, when she was a young woman full of arrogance, she had been engaged to a man named Richard Dawson. He was kind-hearted, too kind for her, and she had pushed him away. He had spoken of a young boy he helped, a boy who had nothing but faith. A boy named Jerry. Her heart pounded. Could this be the same child Richard had once spoken about? She looked at Jerry again, truly looked at him, and saw not just a flight attendant, but a man shaped by pain, hope, and destiny. A man who, unknowingly, had just reopened a chapter of her past. I love this twist. The revelation about Richard Dawson connects Jerry and Clara in a deeply emotional and unexpected way. This opens the door for rich storytelling, Clara's past regrets, Jerry's hidden struggles, and perhaps even the lingering impact of Richard Dawson's choices. For the next chapter, we can deepen the mystery by exploring Clara's past with Richard. Did she leave him for selfish reasons? Was there a moment of betrayal or heartbreak? Maybe she realizes that rejecting him was the moment her life began to unravel. Meanwhile, Jerry could start questioning why Clara reacted so strongly to Dawson's name. What if he has a letter or an old photo from Dawson that makes the connection undeniable? Mrs. Clara's hands trembled as she clutched the armrest of her seat. Her mind spun with memories she had buried long ago, memories of Richard Dawson, the man she once loved and left behind. Jerry noticed the shift in her expression. "Mrs. Clara, are you all right?" She forced herself to breathe. Richard Dawson, he was, she hesitated, unsure how to phrase it. He was someone I knew. Someone important. Jerry frowned. You knew Mr. Dawson? His voice held a mixture of surprise and curiosity. Clara nodded slowly. A long time ago. The murmur of the passengers leaving the plane faded as Jerry leaned in. He changed my life, he said softly. Taught me how to fly. How to dream again. Clara's throat tightened. The last time she had seen Richard, he had begged her to stay. Told her that love wasn't about power or money, but about faith in each other. She had laughed at him. Walked away without looking back. And now here she was, an aging woman filled with regrets, sitting across from a man whose life had been shaped by the same man she had once thrown away. Where is he now? She whispered. Jerry's expression darkened. Mr. Dawson passed away 5 years ago. The words hit her like a blow to the chest. She had always imagined that one day, she might find him again, explain, apologize, something. But that chance was gone. Jerry hesitated before reaching into his pocket. He pulled out an old, worn envelope. Before he died, he gave me this. He said, if I ever met a woman named Clara, I should give it to her. Clara's breath caught. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she took the envelope. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Richard had written to her. And now, after all these years, she was finally about to hear his last words.